Welcome everyone to another edition of Caldwell Chats. This is a series where we like to highlight some really new and cutting edge disruptive innovations. And so today we are joined by Hitesh and Peter from Nutromics. And so welcome to both of you. We'd love if, thanks for coming here. And we'd love, Peter, maybe you can start us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what exactly Nutromics does.
Yeah, sure. My background, I'm a chemical engineer. I've been an entrepreneur for 18 years. Seems like a long time. I think it's about 18. So anyway, many years, mainly in skincare actually, and now moved into medical devices. So what we do at Nutromics, well, I'm co-founder, co-CEO, and Hitesh here is also co-founder, co-CEO. We have a vision with a world with zero preventable deaths as a result of a lack of timely molecular data. That's our vision. That's what drives us as a company. And the way we're going after that vision is a wearable device that can monitor any molecular target continuously and in real time. So it's a small patch, similar to a continuous glucose monitor that many people might be familiar with. But instead of just being able to monitor one thing, we can monitor many things, many molecular targets continuously and in real time. And this isn't aspirational. We have 12 sensors that we've already developed. 10 papers have been published on it. It's when you can monitor anything, you have an enormous scope to solve lots and lots of problems in healthcare, such as therapeutic drug monitoring, which is where we're starting, but also early biomarkers of fast-moving disease states like sepsis and things like that. So we're very, very excited about this technology, about our team, about what we're about to do. We're moving really quickly. And we got a really big vision, a bold vision, and we're going after it.
That sounds really exciting. Hitesh, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me as well, Katie. So as Peter said, I'm co-founder, co-CEO of Nutromics with Peter. My personal background, so before Nutromics was consulting in the healthcare space. So I was part of IBM Watson Health's division in a global consulting capacity. And that meant a lot of travel and looking at healthcare systems across the globe and how we can help improve new models of care, new models of service delivery. So I did a lot of work in the States with the ACA rollouts up in Minnesota, in the UK, working remotely with the government there, in Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia. And the problems we saw over and over again was just about how do you improve access to services? How do you improve coverage? How do you improve models of care and deal with some of those inefficiencies? So a lot of that led me to look at wanting to start my own company and wanting to tackle some of those problems in a more impactful way, which is around when I met Peter. So we were on different journeys at the time and met and had a shared passion and started to collaborate. And it moved pretty quickly. You know, when we originally met, it was around September 2017. And we pitched the idea of what we wanted to build to a accelerator program, a medtech actuator program in December. And we were accepted in February or January in 2018 and started the course in February 2018. And it moved pretty fast from there to where we are today, where it's no longer just the two of us. We're fast growing. We've got 20 people on the team now, rapidly building the technology and getting ready for our first in human trials with the technology.
That's really exciting. Now, the focus of your company here, it's centered around patient molecular monitoring. And one of the first areas you are diving into is this idea of therapeutic drug monitoring, specifically around the drug Vancomycin, which is a very broad spectrum antibiotic that has a very narrow therapeutic window. So traditionally, when someone is started on that, you know, doctors just prescribe this standard dose of 1 gram every 12 hours. So what exactly is wrong with that picture, and what do you aim to help resolve with that? So Hitesh, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, so the challenge there is that this is a very fast-moving disease where you're often dosing vancomycin. And the doctors are only getting a picture of how the dosing is going when they take a trough dosing every 12 hours, as you mentioned. And there's a number of factors that can change the levels for a patient. It can be based on the sex, the age, the level of their severity of their disease, the renal clearance rate. So it needs to really be personalized monitoring, which it isn't today. Today, the approach is that, well, we'll take a measurement once every 12 hours. And sometimes that measurement can be missed. In a busy ward, nurses may forget to take the doses exactly 12 hours later. So they try and aim for plus or minus 2-hour windows. And all that results in is, you're often having a lot of discomfort for the patients. You're prolonging the progression of the disease, so you're not able to actually treat them properly. The doctors may underdose them because they're worried that they haven't got the levels and the results back from pathology. So let's maybe go for a smaller dose. Or you may find that you've actually ended up with a toxic dose. So the patients have got acute kidney injury or further complications, and you're trying to then walk it back. So all of this culminated last year where the guidelines for vancomycin dosing actually changed to recommend area under the curve-based dosing. And currently, approximately 84% of the hospitals still don't follow those guidelines just because it's so difficult to do. Because to follow the guidelines, that means you have to take a lot more blood draws than what you do today. Or you have to try and use complex software to try and predict where the levels are going to be for a patient. So all of that means that today, 60% of the dosing decisions are not in the right therapeutic window. And 10 to 20% of patients end up with acute kidney injury and further complications.
Yeah, that's a very troubling problem. Now, this can also, if we don't dose this drug properly, Peter, this can also lead to some increased antimicrobial resistance in the community too, and these drugs won't work as well for future infections. Is that a problem here too?
It is AMR is a massive problem, a huge problem. That one of the drivers is the inability to dose the drug, to personalize the dose of that drug. So what happens now, let's look at sepsis as an example. So a patient will come in, and sepsis is a fast moving disease state. In the later stages, for every 1 hour treatment is delayed, the risk of death goes up 7%. So this is something that is urgent and acute, and clinicians need to make decisions quickly. And so what they need to do is identify what the bacteria is, and to know what antibiotic to provide. That takes time. So what happens then is that they get a cocktail of antibiotics, because it's like a shotgun approach. And so what happens is that you get patients that are getting huge amounts of antibiotics, all different types, because the clinician rightly is trying to save their life because they don't know what the bacteria is. So we have this widespread use of lots of different antibiotics for lots of people, and a lot of it is redundant, unnecessary, but no one knows that at the time. They're trying to save their life. So when you do that enough, you get antimicrobial resistance because you just have a proliferation of the use of certain drugs, and that's one of the major drivers of resistance. When you can personalize a dose of a drug to an individual, that changes the game. So where we're heading as a company is early diagnosis of fast-moving disease states. Because we can monitor any molecular target, we can then start to resolve this chicken and egg scenario where we don't have a consensus on what are some of the early biomarkers of these disease states. We have an idea, it gets debated, it might be procalcitonin, it might be other molecular markers. But once we have the technology that can monitor multiple molecular targets, we can start to have a true bona fide a range of molecular targets that will now accurately be able to diagnose these disease states earlier, which means that they can give treatments targeted earlier. They're not giving the cocktail of drugs. And so that's going to go a long way to improving antimicrobial resistance, which is that huge problem. So that's one of the ways. There's a whole range of different things. It's not just a one shot wonder here, but it is a big step in the right direction to resolving this huge problem that's actually getting worse. We're going to be hearing a lot more about AMR in the future, just because it's just such a major problem.
Mm-hmm.
Just adding to that as well, just the fact that we will be able to help resolve underdosing problems by making it more accurate for the clinicians to keep the patient the right level means that you're not giving the bacteria the time to develop that resistance to the dosing. So a big issue with the AMR aspect is that clinicians are underdosing, and that gives time for the bacteria to develop resistance to the drugs in the first place. And the reason why they're underdosing is because they can't get the right monitoring information in front of them to manage that dosing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Now, can you maybe walk us through, Hitesh, a little bit about how does your continuous molecular monitoring patch work exactly?
Yeah, so it's really exciting technology, and it's really two key technologies coming together. One is a microneedle based array, which allows us to build a wearable lab on the skin, as we call it. And that is about 1 millimeter long needles, which we can functionalize for different targets of interest. The other is, and this is the core of our technology, is what's called an aptamer system. So this is a DNA-based technology that allows us to build these sensors, the biosensors, quite rapidly. And this is quite revolutionary in the space. Typically the approach has been to build an enzymatic-based sensor for biochemical monitoring or to look at antibodies and so forth. And they all have different challenges. Aptamers work really well in the body for continuous in vivo real-time detection. And it's a true platform capability because ultimately it works the same way biology works in our body for continuous monitoring. That was what the light bulb that led Professor Kevin Plaxco, who's the inventor of the technology, to develop this platform. And the proof is, as we say in the pudding, where today it took him 10 to 15 years to build the base platform and demonstrate it for the first target in a living body. But then in 4 years after that, he's demonstrated 12 different targets, and 10 of those have already been published in journals. So it's a scalable platform, and that's what allows us to start to look at being able to apply that onto a wearable microneedle patch and ultimately deliver a patch that works for every patient, that can have multiple sensors being measured or multiple targets being measured with multiple sensors continuously in real time on a single patch that's about the size of a 20-cent coin.
Wow, incredible. And what would it feel like for the patient to be wearing this patch? Are they going to notice that, like an insulin pump, it's always noticeable when somebody has one? Or is this very, you say it's very small, is it discreet? The patient won't really feel much of it?
Yeah, the latter. So part of the reason for choosing microneedles is because it gives us access to interstitial fluid, which correlates strongly with blood for a number of markers. And glucose monitoring, the continuous glucose monitoring technology, for example, works in the subcutaneous space as well, which is where the microneedles also go. The key difference there is it's not as long as CGM needles. It's about 1 millimeter. So the usability, the form factor, the patient experience is a lot better. You don't feel as much pain. In fact, it's classed as pain-free approaches.
That's fantastic. Now, Peter, can you maybe walk us through some other healthcare settings that this biosensor might be applicable to, in addition to, therapeutic drug monitoring of antimicrobials?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there's about 40 drugs indicated for TDM, therapeutic drug monitoring. So that's a vertical we're going down in a major way. We call that a kind of low-hanging fruit. But there are literally dozens and dozens of problems that we can solve in healthcare. I'll give you a couple of examples. So one is people who have heart attacks are after their first heart attack, they're at high risk for a second heart attack, and they're often sent home, and there is basically no monitoring. They're looking for symptoms like chest pains, and that creates a lot of anxiety for these patients, because as you can imagine, you've just had a life-threatening event and you're waiting for a second acute life-threatening event, which may or may not come. And every little twinge and every little thing that happens in your body, the anxiety goes through the roof, because you're thinking, is this my next heart attack coming? And I've got a personal experience with that with my sister, who literally a few weeks ago, completely healthy, had a heart attack, survived, flatlined, but survived, luckily, and then was sent home, and was in a real state, because she was just consumed with anxiety, which is a vicious circle, because that level of anxiety, it can actually trigger more, that creates more stress in the heart, and so that's not something obviously you want your patient who's just had a heart attack to be going through high stress moments like that. So biomarkers like troponin and BMP provide an early warning of an impending heart attack. It would provide enormous comfort for the 800,000 people that have heart attacks in the US every year, that get no monitoring whatsoever. So you can imagine if you've had a heart attack and you get to wear a device and you get a warning that that twinge is actually bona fide and you need to go straight to hospital, that would be incredibly valuable for those people. But we don't have it now, because we don't have a technology that's in the market that can monitor troponin and BMP. That's what we're working towards. So that's one use case that's going to be extremely valuable for lots of people. Another one is kidney transplant. So the most common organ transplant is kidney. And when you have a kidney transplant, you need to have regular creatinine monitoring. So creatinine is the gold standard for kidney health, essentially. So what a lot of people who have kidney transplants have to do, they've just had a major life experience, it's a huge thing to have an organ transplant, obviously. And now what a lot of them do is they have to move home if they're not close to a hospital, because they need to be close to a hospital to have these regular blood tests that monitor their creatinine levels. So it's a huge disruptor in their life. We now have a creatinine sensor. So imagine now that same person who had to right now they have to move home. It's a huge disruption. They can be sitting in the comfort of their lounge room, and a clinician can get on their monitor, and in real time they can monitor their creatinine level at any moment, at any point in time, 24/7. That's what we're talking about here. So that is not evolutionary. That's a revolutionary shift in what we're talking about. And these are just a small number. When we think about the applications, we see it like a pyramid. The known applications are at the tip, right? These are things we know we can do. But this technology will uncover applications that we've never even dreamed about. There will be researchers that will use our technology and discover things that we just don't know about, that'll be transformative. So that's the type of technology this is. It's an enabler. It will solve real world problems now, but it will solve many more problems in the future. And that's the thing that's super exciting, is almost the known is exciting. The unknown is possibly even more exciting, depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, that's so powerful and so exciting too. Now, those of us watching here in the US, we can hear your accents. We know you're an Australian-based company. So who is your intended market for this product? Are you only launching in the US, in Australia? Are you going to be launching in the US? What's kind of your reach of this technology? Hitesh, maybe we'll go to you for this one.
Yeah, look, this technology has global applications, and we're building it for global use. We are looking to launch in the US as our first market. So we're aiming to enter the US by 2025, and are currently looking for partners and investors to help support that operation and that setup and scale up for the US market. And we're starting to now engage with the FDA in the pre-sub process as well to prepare for entry into the US market. But beyond that, it is going to be a global approach for us. We will start to then look at other markets like Europe and Asia and so forth.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, Peter, can you maybe tell us, you said earlier that you started your business around 2017, then COVID hit. What effect has the COVID-19 pandemic had on the growth of your company?
That's a great question. There are some things that you can control and some things you can't. COVID is one, unfortunately, one that we had to deal with as best we could. And we were talking before we started recording this session, and we're from Melbourne, and Melbourne has the unenviable distinction of being the most locked down city in the world. And we're starting we've got a medtech company that's building a product, growing rapidly in the most locked down city in the world. So, it's challenging as it is. It's doubly as challenging when under those conditions. It didn't really hamper us as much as perhaps we would have thought. And the reason being is that with our development, we were able to get exemptions to allow us to continue to get into the lab. So that was fortunate that we were able to do that. If it wasn't for that, it would have put us back months. But we were able to get into the lab. It still continued. Probably the biggest impact, and one that we still see now a little bit, is getting deliveries. Now, Australia is on the other side of the world, right? So getting deliveries is, geographically challenging, right? But with the supply chain issues, I think everyone's seeing, but we're probably a bit more pronounced here in Australia. That's a little frustrating. It just takes longer. We've got to order things earlier and things like that. But the long story short, it's we've grown rapidly despite the pandemic, and in some ways the pandemic has benefited us. It's been a tragedy the world over, but one thing it's done is that the world has appreciated remote patient monitoring. The advantage of being able to effectively look after patients outside of a hospital setting was a trend that was always happening, and it's just been put on steroids. And so it's probably gone ahead 10 years out of necessity. And what we do is a technology that enables remote patient monitoring. That's what we do. So that's been a big shift in our favor. And also, wearable medtech is extremely hot in terms of investment. This is a market. You look at Dexcom's market capitalization, for example. They're at $55 billion. They just do CGMs, and there's a whole range of examples of a shift towards wearable technologies. So in a way, there were challenges, but in another respect, possibly greater benefits that we've had as a result of COVID.
Interesting. Now, Hitesh, can you maybe tell us, do you have any advice for startups that are looking to enter the medtech space? Any words of wisdom you wish to share?
Yeah, so look, this is a very challenging space to enter, right? If you want to build a company, this is one of the hardest areas to build a company in, to be honest. But it's also one of the most exciting spaces to build a company in. And that's because you can have such a huge impact in saving lives, or in helping people live healthier for longer. There's just so many challenges that innovators and entrepreneurs can solve in the medtech space. So it is really exciting from that perspective. And it gives the company a bold vision and a mission for any medtech startup that makes the team proud to do what they do, to come in every day, to tell their kids, I work in a company that helps to save lives, is very powerful. And it brings a lot of people together to help solve these collective challenges. But you also can't do it in isolation. So if you're going to look to be successful in the medtech space, you need to collaborate. You need to be resourceful, not just be focused on what resources you have internally. And you have to look to build a strong ecosystem to survive. or partner with the ecosystem that's existing. So the key aspect there is knowing what problem you want to solve, just because there are so many, and focusing on that niche, focus on that challenge, build the right ecosystem to help you support the company and solve that challenge. And that in turn means you'll actually make a real impact in a space that desperately needs it.
And I'd add to that, we're going through this period called the Great Resignation at the moment. I think a lot of people have heard of it. I just read an article, Scott Galloway, and there has been more people in the US that's resigned last month than ever in the history of the country, right? So, and the question is why? Why are they resigning? And the thinking is they're resigning because they've gone through, everyone's gone through this unique period where they're reevaluating their life and things that, think what they're doing with their life. And a lot of people, I think, and we can all relate to this, I think, to some degree, are looking for more meaning. So if you're an entrepreneur and one of the things you need to do is find talent, find great people. You gotta have great technology, you gotta have great people, and you gotta have great culture. They're the three keys to a great company. But we're in a time where anyone in this sector, there are a lot of people looking for jobs with meaning. And if you're in medtech, you're ticking that box many times over. So you have a unique opportunity right now to ride that wave and really build a great team, because you can get access to some great people.
Yeah, and really seems like really make a difference in the world and in the work that you're doing day in and day out.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really motivating and encouraging. Now, just on a closing note here, just to kind of look ahead to the future, what does the future of this continuous monitoring and maybe even the medtech space, what does the future of it look like, 10, 20 years down the road?
I can start. I'm going to use us as an example here, but so monitoring molecular targets, there's the, and what does that mean? Okay, so you can do that, but how does it benefit society? So we talked a bit about some of the benefits, and so therapeutic drug monitoring is a huge one. Early biomarker discovery is another huge one. Where I think we're going to go with this technology, where that's super exciting. We talk about precision medicine, and it's a term that we've talked about for years, but what does it actually mean? And it's about personalizing treatments and drugs to an individual, and not saying you're like millions of other people and we're going to treat you all the same, because that's all we can do right now. We're going to say, Katie, you're unique, and we're going to treat you based on you, what's optimal for you personally, not as a average of millions of people. And we can do that with closed loop systems. And the best example is the artificial pancreas. So the artificial pancreas is basically, for those who don't know, it's monitoring glucose and dosing insulin automatically optimized. So right now, diabetics prick their finger, they measure their glucose levels, they do some calculations, they work out what insulin they need, and they give themselves through an insulin pump or however an amount of insulin. Right? It's clunky, it's non-sophisticated, and it's certainly not optimal. And the artificial pancreas basically automates that whole process. So it's monitoring constantly and dosing constantly, so you get an optimal delivery of insulin in that case. But we can expand that to lots and lots of things. So for example, vancomycin, if you go in and you need a antibiotic because you've got a bacteria that can potentially kill you, you want to get into that therapeutic state super fast, and you want to stay there. So the ability to monitor and dose automatically is the fastest and best way to do that. So that's an example of a closed loop system, but there are dozens and dozens of closed loop systems. That is the promise of precision medicine. So we get safer treatments that are far more efficacious when we can do that. That's optimal. That's the optimal treatment of a patient. So that's where. But the first step is monitoring. If you can't monitor the thing, you can't have a closed loop. You can't have the therapeutic part, the second bit. So that's what I reckon, where I think we're going to go, and that's super exciting. I mean, talking about saving lives. I mean, you can imagine what is that when if you can really expand your mind to think about what that really means for healthcare. That's huge. That's such a significant thing. So that's what I get real super excited about in terms of 10, 20 years down the track.
Yeah, thank you for that. It seems like too that will also impact just healthcare spending and just so many less adverse drug reactions and just people who are hospitalized for those events, and it just really feeds the whole cycle of the healthcare system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just to add to what Peter was saying, the other aspect that's really exciting is the whole prevention aspect, right? So again, just drawing on a personal experience that happened recently, I had an appendix that perforated, wasn't picked up, and then became quite severe, and I ended up in hospital. And while I was being prepped for surgery the next day, again, the severity was not picked up until I collapsed on the hospital floor in septic shock. And then I went through the treatment protocol. I was discharged, and then I was readmitted because the infection was not killed off. So I had to be readmitted for therapeutic drug monitoring again. Now, continuous monitoring patches could have had a completely different experience there. When I collapsed in the hospital, my chances of inpatient mortality were probably somewhere between 50 to 70%. And that's not unusual. That's quite common in sepsis. Whereas a patch early on could have picked up that there was a brewing infection probably 2 weeks before I had to be admitted. A patch at the GP's office could have picked up that there was a severe infection rather than having to do a urine test and then be told, well, I think something's wrong, you need to go to ED. A patch at the ED visit could have picked up that my CRP counts were over 100, whereas the average count should be 5 for a person. Rather than going through the experience where I was told, well, you're standing and you look healthy enough, so why don't you take a seat while I deal with some of the other patients? Because the triaging point is very much a visual, subjective triaging point, and I had to wait 2 hours. And all the time, this infection is getting worse and worse and worse. And you imagine this happens every day in the average households, right? People choose not to go to the doctor. They think, I'm well enough, it'll be fine. And then end up collapsing at home with a heart attack or with sepsis or anything that's brewing. And you just don't have that visibility today. And then in chronic diseases space, right, being able to tell somebody that they're at risk of diabetes and can actually do something about it before it progresses that far, or chronic kidney disease or cardiovascular disease. There's just so many things that continuous monitoring can actually impact and truly revolutionize, right? As Peter said, once you have a disease, being able to close that system to be personalized in the medication, the dosing, and the treatment protocols. But even before that, being able to actually prevent people from having to go into a hospital in the first place.
Yeah, that's really impactful, and we're all really glad to hear you're recovered from that incident. That's really some scary things there.
It was a great trial by fire experience in the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we want to really just thank you both so much for joining us tonight and sharing your story. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments you'd wish to share here?
Look, yeah, I mean, as a company in our DNA, we collaborate broadly. We always have, and we don't want to limit the innovation to within the 4 walls of our organization. That's a bottleneck. So we work with a number of universities and researchers, and we always, when we do these sort of things, we like to put a call out to anyone who's listening, who has an application that might have thought, gee, if you could measure X, Y, or Z, there would be an amazing solution to an intractable problem that I've always thought of. And we hear this often when we talk to researchers or clinicians. If you feel like that, don't stay silent. Like, reach out to us. We're really keen to hear from you. We have an open innovation back end of our model where we actively collaborate with partners. And that idea may just be that seed that in a few years' time could actually change a lot of lives, because it all starts with an idea, and it takes someone with courage to make to step forward and say and do something, whether it's shoot off an email, jump on LinkedIn, whatever it is. But all great ideas start somewhere. They're a seed. There's someone who says, I'm gonna give it a go and see what happens, right? And so we would encourage anyone listening to do that and to reach out to us, because you never know where that could go. It could be life-changing for you, and it could be life-changing for lots and lots of people as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll be sure to share your contact information at the end of this as well, should anybody be interested in reaching out. So thank you again for joining us, and for everybody tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this segment and that it was very informative and educational. And we look forward to hearing from you, as many of you as possible.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.